So welcome to the Global Discussions with creatives, leaders, and thinkers. Today, I'm joined by Billy Dees. You're very welcome to the podcast, Billy. And before we get into it, I'd like to ask you to introduce yourself to our international audience. Tell us a little bit about your journey, how you got into the world of audio, radio production, and maybe share a little bit about yourself with our audience. So over to you, Billy.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. This is like the global interview. So this is like fantastic. And I mean that sincerely. I mean, audio is becoming a big thing and all around the world. There's been a renaissance, if you will, of audio. And that's fantastic. I'm a big proponent of the idea that the spoken word is an art form. And I did an interview for another company here a couple of weeks ago, and it was a guy sharing his journey of addiction, and he got very personal. And after that interview, I even made the remark that had we done video, it wouldn't have come off that way. I mean, your voice goes just a few inches into a microphone and right into someone's ear, and all the passion, all the regret, all of the heartache that he knows he caused his family, and the heartache that he caused for himself. This was all contained in his voice, and I'm a big proponent of that. And not every episode that you're going to do is going to unlock secrets of the universe. That's not what I'm saying, but I do believe there's that aspect of audio that doesn't get the respect that it deserves. And that's the one downside with everybody jumping on the bandwagon with audio, is that there seems to be a tendency to do videos and a lot of other things and just strip the audio off and throw it onto a podcast. And cable people, television shows do exactly the same thing. They start a podcast, and all they really do is repurpose their audio. And that's really not, to me, what podcasting is. That's not what audio content is. To answer your question, I would probably say that I got involved with doing this kind of work many, many years ago. I don't know what it's like in your part of the world, but back in the 1970s and the 1980s, when I was a little kid, audio in terms of stereo equipment was a big deal. I mean, audiophiles were the thing. I mean, especially for boys, you had a car and it had so many horsepower in the engine, and you had a stereo system, and it was kazoodles of watts, and my speakers were bigger than your speakers and all these other kind of things, And I got in tune with the electronics of that at a very young age. My dad was probably a good person to get me started into that. So I actually started working as a teenager, going around to people's homes, setting up their stuff, fixing problems that they had. And it just kept growing from there. And I always kind of say being middle-aged is at this time, a good time period to be in, because I was brought up with the electronics of audio, the hot microphone placement, speaker placement, the resistance, signal flow, all these other things. And I was weaned in at the very early days of when digital started coming in. And I say that's a good combination because I've noticed that people who are particularly young in the creative fields rely on software way too much to fix problems and do things that they shouldn't be doing with the software. That's not what software is for. You should, whether you're a photographer, audio person, whatever, you should be doing your best to take the best pictures possible. Learn your craft, learn what lenses to use, learn composition, learn lighting, all these other things. And then you use software to edit. You don't use software to make a bad picture good. That's not what it's for. By the same token, people who are much older than me, who've been in the business for a long time, and I know a lot of them, they don't like computers, and one of the things that computer and digital technology can do much better than when I first started was edit. A lot of times, a lot of the music that we listened to from the 60s, 70s, and 80s, when that was remixed, when you have a band or you have something, there's the drums on various tracks, lead guitar on various tracks, lead singer, backup singers, all on various tracks. And to get that right, they would mix it down. But what they were really doing, and same with video, quite frankly, is they were making precision copies. They had a multi-track play, go through a mixer, get everything balanced out the way they wanted it to, and then transferred it to a master track, which became the record, became this, the cassette or whatever it was that you were doing. And that was, by its very nature, second generation. Okay. And one of the things that computer technology can do very, very well for you is give you the opportunity to mix down what are essentially first generation tracks. And you have that composition done in the digital realm, so to speak. And that's where the older guys that kind of shove the computer stuff aside are really missing a big opportunity to make their stuff better, and even their old stuff. That when you hear about things being remastered, that's what a lot of the recorders, especially during the 1970s, were very good. The stuff that recorded the Carpenters and all that stuff, those machines were awesome. Now we can take those original multi-track tapes, transfer them to video, and remix them down, and essentially have a first generation mix down. So to me, those two worlds are important. A lot of times I've noticed a lot of young folks with a software that's trying to emulate something that I know they've never touched in the real world, some sort of a mixer or something. And you have a much better understanding when you know what the software is trying to emulate. And by the same token, on the other side of the coin, you can do much better in the digital side of things, especially in post-production. So somebody like myself, I kind of feel, has the best of both worlds as a creator, and I've been able to merge those two things.
Thanks.
I don't know if that's
Thank
too
you.
much information. You're probably
No,
sorry you asked.
that's wonderful, Billy. And it is interesting when you can see both sides of that coin. You can see sort of, I'm going to use the word analog. It's probably not the right word, but the sort of more
Sure.
mechanical side of things. And then the explosion, I suppose, of software and just the sheer cost of having a recording studio years ago, or booking time in a studio,
Mm-hmm.
was quite cost prohibitive. And yet now technology has helped people from a production perspective, to your point, but also a distribution perspective. When we look at how the internet is compared to, saying, having to, like, I'm thinking of radio stations across the US where they'd be self-funded, they'd have to put the mast up, they'd have to get the license, they'd have to pay people. So it's a very different landscape today, isn't it, audio?
Absolutely. The whole the idea of media is completely different, and it's a double-edged sword when you talk about the ease of production. Now, I would have to say that the professional stuff is still better. What you would call the really costly professional stuff is still better, but the margin of quality between what you would call consumer goods and professional goods is much smaller now. It used to be, to make that leap, that was miles ahead. The pro stuff was miles ahead of what you're going to get in terms of the consumer market. That's not true anymore. It still costs more, sure, and it's still better, but you would be surprised. A lot of the consumer grade or semi-pro gear, as they call it, does an excellent job. Now, the downside to that, you were talking about distribution. It's a great thing that everybody has access, but it's also bad that everybody has access, because your competition is literally in the hundreds of millions, depending on what you're doing worldwide. I mean, there's millions upon millions of people that are putting their stuff out there. So to stand out is also very difficult.
Yeah, it's certainly a noisy, busy landscape. And Billy,
Yes.
before we get off the sort of topic of how you got into audio,
Yeah.
you do a number of things in this audio editing production world. So could you maybe just share a little bit about, because obviously you've got your own podcast, you're involved in a couple of companies. Could you maybe just explain those a little bit for people listening?
Sure. I guess my first love is, as a creator, if you talk to a filmmaker, he's going to say his first love is, telling stories. And I enjoy creating, and I also enjoy the technical aspect of it. And that's also a balance that you don't get every day. A lot of people are much better technicians than I am, per se. And there's probably a lot of creative people out there, the kind of people that are going to cut their ear off out of frustration. I'm somewhere in the middle, and in this business, in this day and age, it's a good thing to have a little bit of a skill in both. So I try to incorporate my love of electronics, my love of microphones, my love of audio into that creative process. So when I have an idea, when I have a concept that I want to do, or when I approach an interview, I can kind of mend those two worlds. So that's kind of my creative process there. That's the fun of it. But you can't always make business. You can't always make money having fun. So I often work for other people. I have a regular job, as they say. I work in marketing, and a lot of what I do is involved for the company that I work for is, this type of stuff, creating training videos, creating videos for their social media, creating for some local television cable stuff. We've done a lot of programs for that. So it's dry work a lot of times. A lot of times I'm doing training material with a doctor or a nurse or a clinician of some kind. I don't even know what they're talking about. But the idea is you have to put that aside. This is what I am doing for somebody else, and it same goes for the podcast that I help edit, for the podcast that I help produce. I also work for myself, and I'm probably more of kind of a technical guide for a lot of those places. A lot of these places that hire me, quite frankly, don't want to be in the podcasting business. They don't want to be in the audio business. All they know is they want it to sound good. They want it to sound like, what you hear on the radio. So they hire somebody like me, and they don't have to do in-house training. They don't have to invest in equipment, all these other kind of things. It's kind of like the old adage, you ask somebody rich, I know how to mow my lawn, but I'm not going to do it. That's kind of like, how you will get hired as a creator a lot of times is, people are focused on what brings them money. They don't want to get involved in the audio business. They want somebody like me to do it. And a lot of people feel that that's some sort of a compromise, but I don't think so at all. I think you're helping somebody tell their story. You're doing what you do best, and you may have creative disagreements with them. And there's a lot of times when I might say, you know what, I'm not sure I would do that. But once I get overridden, that's it. I mean, they're paying me to do what they want to do. So you really have to fall into a supportive role. And you can't get negative when somebody overrides you and say, well, all right, if this is how you want to do it, we'll see how it comes out. That's the wrong attitude. You got to take that concept, whether you like it or not, and make it as best as possible. That's how you serve your clients. And you help them tell their story in the way that they want to do it. So you really have to separate your creative side from what you do as a creator when you're in the process of making money, because when you're charging somebody to do something, it's a whole different thing. And that's how creators, a lot of times, in terms of, we hear so much about directors, a lot of times they didn't like what the studio was doing and they walked off. Well, that's fine. But at some point, you have to do what the people who are financing the project want to do. I won't let somebody walk off a cliff naturally, but there comes a point when you got to put your own personal views aside. So to answer your question, what I do for other people is I help facilitate whatever it is that they're doing. A lot of times that can be an outreach program, which here again, that's pretty dry stuff. A lot of times people do have, a podcast that they're very passionate about their material. So I'm there to make sure that they don't have to worry about clicking too many buttons. All they have to worry about is their content.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. And knowing your expertise, we know each other a little bit behind the scenes, and I'm sure you bring an awful lot of that knowledge, history, expertise to the party. So that makes a lot of sense for a lot of businesses. I get that. And before we move off this topic, just one last quick thing, if I can, Billy. Obviously, this is being recorded. There's lots of different tools out there to get better audio. But this is going to be a video and an audio podcast, and some podcast sort of aficionados would say, oh, it should be pure audio. It shouldn't include video. That's not really a podcast. Then you've got the whole social audio side of things, which got very popular very quickly. And then it's kind of a shifting landscape now. I'm just wondering on your thoughts when it comes to the, pure podcasting. What's your thoughts on that?
Pure podcasting is in audio only. Is that what you mean? Versus video?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. It depends on the content. For example, that video, that podcast that I did a couple of weeks ago, where the guy was sharing his journey of addiction. Quite frankly, I'm not even sure that would have come off as well in video. And if it did, he might not have shown some of the sides that he did speaking in just audio. And with audio as a creator, you really have to remember that we are essentially vocal creatures. And with audio, you have the ability to speak, use your inflection, use the passion in your voice, use your vocabulary, use every tool that you have at your disposal to tell that story. You can't rely on your looks, for better or for worse. Extremely attractive won't help you. If you're a comedian, a lot of comedians aren't necessarily the best looking people, and they've used that in their comedy, right? But that's great, but it won't help you if you're on the radio. You can't rely on anything except the spoken word. And I think that is the ideal case for using audio. A lot of times trauma victims and people like that I've interviewed, I just don't feel that those would have come off as well being video. But on the other hand, there's times when we'll do a real fun interview of some kind where it's just, you don't hear this too much, but like in the radio world, we'll talk about riffing. And we'll just have some current events, some things that are in the news, and we'll just make remarks about it, make observations, make jokes. And in that kind of thing, video is great. There's nothing wrong with doing video at all. I have a lot of publishers contact me in regard to having their authors on the podcast. And one of the things they'll say is, well, we want our author to be seen. So that, they want something that they can feature on their website or whatever. They want a YouTube video or whatever. So these are things that you can't necessarily bypass video. I just think that it's too much of a useful tool. YouTube is the second biggest search engine there is. So I don't know that you can ignore that. But with that being said, a lot of times what I will do when I have an author on the podcast is I will process that audio differently. I will record the audio in something like a roadcaster or some sort of a digital recorder. And I'll give that audio a little bit more radio grit when I put it out in the podcast form for audio. Video, I will, tweak it just a little bit different to be more YouTube friendly. And what I will also do is tell the guest, hey, look, we're going to record video, but make sure you don't rely on visualizations. Don't hold the book up and show it to the camera. Don't do anything like that, because most of my listens anyway, I mean, I'm not even sure what the ratio is, but my audio listens are very high, as opposed to here locally. A lot of times I'll put things on Facebook, and those do pretty well, but my audio listens are through the roof. The only reason we're doing video is so that you can feature it on your website, or we can take snippets of it and feature it as little teasers in social media. So I would say that I do video, but I also am very conscious of the audio listener, because that's where my audience is. So it kind of really has to depend on you as a creator. I do feel there's a place for dedicated audio creators and dedicated audio content in general, but I don't believe that by the same token you can ignore video. It's just too powerful of a tool.
Yeah, 100%, Billy. Thanks. It's interesting what you say when you talk about radio production, like live radio's production that goes out over the airwaves, or digital radio as it is now, I suppose. Quite often you'll see, particularly the large commercial organizations, will have cameras and live stream the show, or live stream the person hosting whatever, the breakfast show, drive time, or whatever it is. And that's become more and more of a phenomenon with audio. But going back to what you said initially as well about the recording you did recently, there's something very personal when it goes into your earphones, whether they're over the head or whether a pair of earbuds that you're putting in. There's something very personal about audio, isn't there? It's a real direct to consumer. It goes straight in.
It goes straight in. With video, the audio, the microphone is placed, it's hidden somewhere, or it's with the camera, worse yet. That's one of the things that as a multimedia specialist, I always tell people, it sounds odd, but one of the things that can really make it for a bad video is bad audio. And quite frankly, a lot of video creators use audio as kind of like a necessary evil. That's how they consider it. Oh yeah, get the lighting just right, get your hair just right, and all this other stuff just right. Oh yeah, I guess we got to get a microphone on. So yeah, I believe that because of the distance involved with a camera, because of all these other things, the fact that you can bring in the classic case where you have some sort of a decent mic, And I'll tell the creators out there, it doesn't necessarily have to be expensive. We talked a little bit in this interview about moderately priced stuff as opposed to expensive stuff. You don't necessarily have to go expensive. But one of the nice things about having an actual microphone in front of somebody's mouth is to capture some of that, to capture what's called the proximity effect, which I am a big believer in. This microphone, if I'm standing across the room and I can talk to you, it'll still hear it. You can hear the audio, but there's a certain magic when you get close. There's a certain, the way the voice comes through, it's like somebody's leaning over and talking to you. And that's what I really, really like. So I always try to bring that in, even when I add a video component, if that answers your question.
It does, Billy. Thank you. And I'm also conscious of time, and I don't want to keep you too long, but I want to squeeze in a few quick questions if I can now.
All right.
So changing gear a little bit, obviously to become this audio guru, that would be the term I'd use for you. You're a specialist at what you do. But when it comes to reading, I like to ask people what sort of books they read, or for you, is it white papers, documents, or is it a particular author or a particular genre that interests you?
When it comes to books, here's what's happened to me. Because of the fact that I get approached by so many authors and so many publishers, I have to read a certain amount of them, or at least parts of them, to get an idea of the tone. So with that being said, I don't know that I've done a lot of recreational reading, and I was never one to read, sit down and actually get consumed with a book for a period of weeks. I do a lot of surfing. I like the real news sites, not so much social media. There's a few blogs that I do check in on, and I'm not going to get political at all, but I'm very much a proponent of not just following the people that you like. That's one of the problems in the United States, and I presume throughout your part of the world as well, the UK and other places. People are in their bubbles now. We follow the people that we like, and consequently, what happens is what you already believe is reinforced. And what we'll do is not only not follow people that we don't agree with, but we'll block them. We'll make sure that their opinion or any facts that they happen to have don't interfere with what we've already decided. So I really take some time, especially I think it makes me a more well-rounded commentator. I'll do various interviews. Some people lean left, some people lean right. Some people, they claim to be independents and all these other things, which is fantastic. I think we need more of that. I think we need more free thinking. But I have a basic knowledge of the world as it's presented, through a number of different lenses, and that gives me an opportunity to be a better interviewer. And that's probably what I spend most of my time doing. When I have some downtime between projects or whatever, I'll pop something up. I'll go to Fox News, and then I'll go to CNN. And if you're not from the United States, Fox is considered by leftists to be a notorious right-wing site, and MSNBC and other places are considered by the right to be left-wing wackos. So somewhere in between, the truth has a tendency to emerge. And I know when I've pissed off both sides, I know I'm right.
Well, I think having a balanced view, and particularly, obviously, this being the global discussion, having a global view, it is very easy. And I've seen that happen in very small geographies too, where people get almost look inward on themselves. Yeah. And they don't look at it through a global lens, or they don't take on additional inputs. And one great piece of advice I got many, many years ago was that whenever you had a bit of downtime or a little bit of time off or a vacation, try to read things that are not in your field, that are completely something that you would never pick up, something that you'd never buy. Just go and choose 2 or 3 titles like that, whether it's a book or a magazine. Sure. What about audiobooks, Billy? Are you a fan of audiobooks? Do you think the person reading them brings it to life, being
absolutely. Yes, absolutely. And I let me follow up on one thing. This applies to podcasts or anything else. A lot of people won't listen to a podcast because I'm not interested in that. Try listening to one that talks about something that you're not normally interested in. It might open up your world. And a lot of times you might turn it off after a few minutes, but by the same token, you might be surprised. Audiobooks are an interesting beast. My wife listens to them quite often. I think for the most part, in this busy world, especially when people are commuting and doing other things, it's really nice to be able to listen to a book. and not have to sit down and read it. And a lot of people who have been reading for a lot of years, they suffer from eye strain, they need glasses and this, that, and the other thing. So, it makes it easy just to relax and listen to a good book. I don't feel that listening to a book takes anything away from, reading it. I don't think it works the other way around. I think there's a certain magic as a writer when you're actually typing something out as opposed to dictating it. I don't know that dictation programs, the magic gets lost. I can speak a certain thing, but if I type it out into a paragraph and go back and fix it and tweak it, there's a certain magic that happens there. And I think that people who rely on dictation to do their writing then have another editor go back and fix all the little problems. I think they're missing something in their creative process when they do that. I have been approached about doing audiobooks, and sometimes the money's fairly decent. However, you earn it. If you think about your average book and how long it takes you to casually read it, let's say it's anywhere between a half a dozen to a dozen hours, 6 to 12 hours to read a book. And you do that over the course of, a week or two or whatever. After work, you read a few chapters or while you're trying to go to sleep or whatever. Okay. So you have to keep in mind that in real time, it takes 12 hours to read that book. Now, speaking it would logically take every bit of 12 hours, but, you're not going to read an entire book perfectly. A lot of times, voiceover actors will read the book several times before they go into the studio. And then you're going to go several passages or pages at a time. And, you're talking about hours upon hours of painstaking work. And in my case, I would also have to produce it. I could do it better if I had somebody else doing the recording and running all the, looking at all the blinking lights. But to do both would be extremely painstaking, and it would take so much time from the other things that I'm doing. Quite frankly, I've never wanted to jump into that. But I do get offers every once in a while. And I'll tell you what, it's an emerging area of business. If you feel you have a good voice and you want to, get into that business, a lot of times now their equipment will make a difference. A lot of times the places that contract this type of stuff out will ask you what you're using. They'll want to know what kind of microphone you're using, what software you're using, and so on, just to make sure that you're not using a $50, online special somewhere to record a book that's costing thousands upon thousands of dollars to publish. But aside from that, once you get past that, you can make a good living doing that. And a lot of people do, or at least supplement. I don't know about a good living. Some people can, but you can at least supplement it. There's a lot of people out there who are weekend warriors. That's what they do on their weekends, man, is they record these audiobooks. And there's in this digital world, a lot of people want voice work now. In my day, when I first started, the only people that wanted voice work were radio stations and sometimes video production companies. But now, everybody needs voice work, and there's so many ways that you can get involved in that if you wish to do so.
Yep. Thanks for those views, Billy. Very helpful. So when you look over your career to date or the journey you're on, or maybe looking even outside of the sort of area of expertise that you have, is there anybody that you admire or, anybody that sort of inspired you along the way?
In the radio business, and this is going to sound very harsh, when I first started back in like the late 80s, I'm not going to give my age away, but when I was driving around what were called carts, I used to make voiceovers and things that were recorded on what was called a half track. It was a real type of reel. And then you would take it to the radio station and transfer it to what was called a cart. And it would work very similar to what an 8-track does, except it wasn't 8 tracks. And you would preload there would be a stack of them, and you would preload all your commercials and everything for the next break in this cart machine. And in those days, egos, and I would guess that the radio business hasn't changed that much. The egos and the amount of help that you will get in that world are very, very few and far between. However, there were some really good ones. There was one major, and I don't know if this can exist in modern times, but back in the 90s, the idea of a very successful radio DJ was still very possible. And there was one that as enormous as he was in terms of the listenership that he had in the morning, he never talked down to anyone. He always treated people with respect. When he did personal appearances, he treated everyone so nicely. And I ended up doing some work at that station, and I worked really hard on an advertisement one day. I was in my studio and I had a 4-track tape recorder, and I laid the music down and I laid this down, sound effects in there, and I made sure my voice was just perfect and blah, 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 blah. And I was all excited. And I went to him and I said, "Hey, what do you think of this?" And he goes, "Well, I got to tell you, Billy, man, it sounds like you really worked hard on this." And I was like, "All right." And he goes, "It shouldn't sound like that." And he explained to me that, you just need to sound like this was easy. You're just talking to somebody and telling them about something. And it changed. I've always kind of had that in the back of my mind when I'm doing stuff. I know people really like to do a lot of research, really like to fill their podcast with a lot of statistics and a lot of other things. And at times you got to put your effort into being a good communicator, not in being perfect. And that's kind of a little strategy that I've always kind of carried with me ever since that happened.
Well, that's some great advice. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
And what about today, Billy? As you look forward, we're recording this. We're going into another new year.
Yeah.
What are you passionate about over the next 12 months? What are you thinking about?
I'm very lucky I mentioned my day work, and I'm very lucky to work for a nonprofit that does a lot of good in the community. And this is in regard to mental health and addiction and other things. And over the years, since I've worked for them, I've got in touch with a number of other nonprofits. And I got to say that the nonprofit world, there's nothing wrong. I want to be very clear. I'm a capitalist, American, hate me as much as you want. But there's nothing wrong with a for-profit company. Okay. The world wouldn't be the same without Steve Jobs. The world would not be the same without Henry Ford. And these were, same with Bill Gates and a lot of other people. These were flawed individuals, I'm sure, to some degree, but without them, the world that we have today wouldn't have its current form. So I'm all about for-profit companies and their success, and I've done a lot of work for for-profit companies. But over the last 10, I can tell you come home with a different feeling. I went to a little picnic about a year or so ago that one of the nonprofits held, and a counselor came over to me and said, "See that family over there?" And the father of that family was near death. He was suffering from suicidal ideation, horrible depression, horrible addiction, and all these things coincided. One thing fed another bad thing. It just kept going down the ladder. And he was able to get help through the nonprofit. And those children have a complete family because of the work that I am helping them do. I'm not one of the people that's on the front line. I'm not an infantryman. I just talk about it. And I got to say, a lot of times these counselors are up against it. They're up against people who don't want to be helped. They're up against people who a lot of times don't realize that you're trying to help them, and they resent you for it. And a lot of times a lot of successes don't happen at their job. But there's that moment when somebody has their family intact, their loved ones are here, their children are here, their parents are here, their brothers and sisters are here, and they're at that picnic and they're eating hot dogs and they're throwing frisbees because of the work that these institutions do. And I think that's a value. A lot of the people that work for these types of organizations don't make the amount of money that they would in the private sector. Quite frankly, they're there because they want to be there. They're because they believe in the mission. And I'm very passionate about that. And I could tell you a lot of these counselors and stuff have some amazing stories about what has happened in the recovery community and what we do for the homeless a lot of times in this area as well. And these are things that don't get celebrated. We celebrate professional athletes, we celebrate entertainers, we celebrate a lot of other things, but we don't really celebrate these people who are working a job. They went to school for a lot of years. They became a medical professional, and now they're working at a place where they're making maybe a half or three quarters of what they could be at a private practice because they want to help people. These people are real heroes, and I'm very proud to work alongside them and help them.
Yeah, I understand that. I've done a bit of work and worked with some nonprofits over the years quite closely.
Yeah.
And you're right. The money comparison compared to what some of these individuals could make in the private sector in my part of the world is very, very different.
Yeah.
Although charities and nonprofits are heavily scrutinized now.
Really?
A lot of financial rigor that's been applied because there have been a number, a couple of bad actors spoil it for a lot of other people.
Yeah, unfortunately, that happens. Yeah.
It seems to be getting better in various geographies, but yeah, you're right, and I think it is interesting when you listen to those stories. You start to really appreciate, at least I did. You start to really appreciate what's important.
Yes.
And it brings a different level of meaning, and for somebody that was never involved in that world, it opened up a lot of new perspectives, I think would be the best way to describe it. Yeah.
Sure. And that comes with age. I mean, when I was 22, 23 years old, I don't think I was ever a shallow person, but I wanted people to know my name. I'm a disc jockey, and that's not really that important to me anymore. I think now the compassion side has become the priority. And being around people who feel the same way and work in the community and help other people, those are special relationships. And I'm very, very, very pleased to have gotten involved in that in the last 5 to 10 years.
Well, thank you for sharing that with us today, Billy. Look, before we wrap up, I want to make sure I ask you that for anybody who wants to get in touch with you and all the wonderful projects you're involved in, where the best place to find you is, and also to give you an opportunity if you wanted to share anything that maybe we haven't touched on today before we wrap up.
Just be kind. That sounds like a cliche, but just be kind. That's all there is to it. That's the meaning of life right there. Just be kind. In terms of finding me, I don't have a lot of variations on my name. It's just Billy Dees. That's BILLYDEES. And kind of my social media home, at least for there's a lot of stuff going on Twitter right now, but Twitter has always kind of fit podcasting very well because of the fact that it is so trending. Anything that's happening immediately, anything that's happening in real time, I would say that Twitter is for the most part the place to be. And it's really built for podcasting and causes and communities and things like that. So if you can find me on Twitter at Billy Dees. There's also any type of social media that I'm on. Here again, I don't have a lot of variations to my name. It's just the Billy Dees Podcast or just Billy Dees. So feel free to follow me, search me out. Same with the podcast. The Billy Dees Podcast is available just about on all the major podcasting networks. So I'm not hard to find.
Thanks very much for sharing that, Billy. And be kind. I think that's a wonderful message to end on.
Yeah.
So look, that brings us to the end of this episode with Billy Dees on the Global Discussion. Thanks so much for watching, both Billy and I. And whether you've been watching or listening, be sure to follow, like, and subscribe. I hope you do tune in for more discussions with creatives, leaders, and thinkers. So thank you, Billy. It's been a pleasure.
Well, thank you for having me. And I'm very excited to have been here. Thank you.